Hello everyone, my name is Laura and you're watching the Beanbird 2 channel where we talk about testimonies and share the goodness of God. Today I have a story to tell you of something that happened to me about 7 years ago, and it's something that I still look back on when I feel like times are uncertain and I feel shaky in what's going on in the world around me and I need to hold on to God's promises and His faithfulness. I look back on this story that happened. So again, 7 years ago, we had 4 kids, and at this time, we thought we were done having kids. We felt like 4 was a good number, it was an even number, and we felt comfortable with how our family was running. And we had our youngest, who was around 2.5, and my husband said to me, "Do you want any more kids?" Because we tried to space them about 2 years apart. And I said, "Nope, I'm good." And he said, "Me too." So we were both in agreement that we were done having kids. And then we were watching TV and a commercial came on, and it was one of those cute baby commercials where they're giving the baby a bubble bath and it's all cute. And he looks at me and he says, "Does that make you want another baby?" And I said, "Nope." And he goes, "Me either." So we were confident that this was the decision and the direction that we were going to go. So my husband said, "You know what, before we make this decision, we should pray about it. And let's say, give it a week where you and I will both pray about it and see if God agrees that, 4 is our complete family and we're done." So I was like, okay. So we were praying about it, although both of our hearts were quite resolved that we were done with having kids. And then the week that we had set aside to pray about it, something happened. I went to the shoe store and I had all my kids with me, and we were shopping for little sandals, and the store lady came up to me and she said, "Your kids are so well behaved. Usually when we have kids in here, they're running up and down the aisles and they're taking shoes out of boxes." And she's like, "But your kids just stay right with you and they listen." And she said, "You know what? If you're thinking about having another one, you should." And I was like, "What?" So I went home and I told my husband, I'm like, "The lady at the store, she said this." And I told him about it. And we were like, that's interesting. So then we went to church, and one of the people that went to our church, I wouldn't say a close friend, but I would say an acquaintance, like we knew each other. And he came up to us both and he said, "You're not going to believe it. I had this dream about you last night." And I was like, "Really?" And we said, "Well, what did you dream?" And he said, "I had this dream that you guys had another baby." And it was like, my husband and I were looking at each other. We're like, "Oh my gosh," because this was the week we were praying about it. And I was thinking, no, this isn't what we want. So then we got home and the week was just about ending, and I really felt like the Lord was leading us in this way, but it was really something that my husband and I didn't want to do, to be honest. And so I said, let's flip a coin 3 times, and if it's heads 3 times in a row, we'll take that as like one more final confirmation that the Lord wants us to have one more baby. So we flipped the coin 3 times, and it did indeed come up heads 3 times in a row. And then we knew, we're like, God is speaking to us. He's telling us to have another baby. Now, the human part of me was worried about provision. I was thinking, having another mouth to feed and take care of. And you always see these articles like on the internet that are like, every child costs you some ridiculous amount of money, like $250,000, over the lifetime, and you start looking at your kids and counting them and being like 250,000, and you think, I don't think we can afford this, but that's the way the world sees things, and that's not the way God sees things. So one of our concerns, or my concern at least, was again like, having another person that we have to provide for, take care of, feed and clothe, and I just knew that if God was calling us to do that, then He would provide for that. And so my husband said, well, we'll call this child the obedience child, because we're doing something we don't want to do because we want to follow the Lord and trust in Him. So sure enough, that month we conceived our fifth child. And I had all my pregnancies with natural birth. And I was really dreading the birth experience going into this. And I thought, oh man, some people love labor, and I'm just not one of those people. So I was like, oh, I don't really want to go through this labor. And the closer I got to the 9 months being through and time for delivery, the closer I got to that date, the more I started to feel kind of anxious about it. And when I was towards the end of the pregnancy, I started having some Braxton Hicks, and those contractions would remind me that my time would be coming soon to give birth, and I would just feel panicked at the thought of going through labor again. And the Lord knew this was on my heart super heavy, and I was feeling super stressed about it. And then one day I was at church, and it was a huge church, and after service was over, a woman that I don't know, never met before, she came up to me and she said, I have to tell you something. She said, while we were worshiping, I heard the Lord tell me something to tell you. And she said, He told me to tell you, don't worry about the delivery. This one will go easy for you. And I knew that she was giving me a real, genuine word from the Lord, because God knew how stressed I was about going into labor. And that really touched me, because that was one of those times when God interceded and said something when He didn't have to, right? It wasn't a life or death situation. It was just a word of comfort, because God knew that it was weighing so heavy on my heart, And so I think about that and those times when God reaches out to us and is so personal and so intimate, and it touched me so deeply. It's hard for me to explain like how deeply that moved me, that God intervened to give me that message of peace. And it wasn't long after that the labor contractions did start. It was maybe a week or two after. And initially I actually thought that I was just sick. And I know that sounds kind of wild, because I already had 4 kids, so obviously I knew what labor felt like, but this didn't feel like labor, because normally in contractions you have a contraction, then it goes away. This was just a constant pain in my gut, and I just felt like, I told my husband, I said, I think I'm sick. And that was like at 7 p.m. And then it was like 2 hours later before I realized that this wasn't nausea, this was actually labor starting. And true to the word of the Lord, when I first started active labor, like I was actually having contractions one after the other, we went to the hospital at, I think it was midnight, and my daughter was born like at 1 in the morning, like an hour later. So from the time we got to the hospital to the time she was born, it was really fast. And her birth was, all labor is hard, but it was easy comparatively to the previous 4 that I had. And I knew that was also such a blessing, that the Lord was like telling me like, hey, this one's going to go easy for you. And it truly did. Before that one, my shortest labor that I'd ever gone through was 8 hours. And her labor was, start to finish, 6 hours. But that was like, most of it was like kind of like a lighter labor. The actual hard part was like 1 hour. And so anyway, all that to say that it was true. God gave me an easy way with that delivery, and it was such a blessing. But this is my point to this whole thing. Even now, right now, I look and I see inflation, and I start to panic a little bit, right? I'm looking at the grocery bill and how it keeps getting higher. And now my kids are older and they eat a whole lot more. And I start feeling this like panic creep in. Unfortunately, I struggle a little bit with like having a scarcity mindset. And there's a part of me that still feels like, what if we don't have enough? What if we can't, provide? What if we don't have enough money? What if my husband loses his job? All the things, right? And I start feeling the stress creep up my back and shoulders. And I'm like, oh. But those times I try to look back at God's faithfulness, and I remember that God said He'll do the providing. He only asks that I do the mothering. And they're God's children, and God promises to provide, and that He's king, and everything is in His hands, right? And so He distributes to His will and desire. And so God doesn't operate from a scarcity mindset. And if I trust that He's got me, and that He loves me, and that He's there for me, and that He's not going to let me fall, I can lean on that. And when I look at my daughter, who's now 7, I think about how she's been the cherry on top in our lives. I mean, she's been so joyful, such a blessing. And it's funny because we thought we were done with 4 kids. We were perfectly happy with 4. And my husband said, she has changed our lives so much that it's like she was like the baby that God gave us. It was like, I'm going to bless you with this one. And she's always smiling. She's always laughing. She's so loving and hugging and drawing pictures. And she blesses the whole family. She blesses our church family. And it's just, I think about how God is so good, and it's funny because we went into it thinking, oh, this is the obedience baby. We're going to do something we don't want to do, but we're just going to be obedient and do what God tells us to do. But the flip side was that God blessed us so much, like we didn't even know. We went into it with this mindset that was completely wrong, and God turned it around to be such a blessing. And my husband and I were like, I can't believe that we, didn't want to go down this road, or that we thought we were done, and we were kind of begrudgingly being obedient to the Lord, and how He's turned it around to be such a blessing. And when I see her as like the cherry on top in our family, and then I think about God's provision for our family as a whole, and I think God didn't take me this far to just leave me here, And when God looks at children, He doesn't look at them as liabilities. He doesn't look at life as a liability. He looks at life as a blessing. And He looks at us as a blessing, right? Like we are little miracles that God breathes His life into us, and we live each day by His word. And that is a gift from God. And it's just amazing how there's nothing that we can take for granted, right? Everything is a gift from God, and He provides for us perfectly. He knows exactly how much we need, and He will be there for us. And so I want that to encourage you, that look back on the times when God has been faithful in your life, promises that He's spoken over you, promises in His word that He will be faithful, and He's gracious and merciful, and that He cares for you, and He wants good things for you. And even if we obey reluctantly, how He can turn that around to be just this huge blessing in your life. And so we just need to trust Him. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is it boils down to trust. And we need to trust the Lord and just give Him our life. And even when we think like we're sacrificing by giving Him something, He turns it around, and we feel like we're the ones that are sacrificing, but really we're the ones getting blessed. And that's that story. So thank you, and I'll see you all later.